Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues and distinguished guests. First of all, I want to thank the organizers, M100 Sanssouci Colloquium, for the invitation to speak here today. I believe that our collective expertise in this room, drawn from media, academia, and politics across Europe, is more critical than ever, and I really look forward to the discussions here today. Let me be honest, the main reason why I accepted this invitation to speak, apart from the great honor, of course, was the opportunity to address some concerns that I have regarding the urgency and the magnitude of the Russian threat, what it means for Europe, and what we should do about it. You might ask or even sigh, what is new about the Russian threat? Already in 2022, NATO, in its strategic concept, defined Russia as the most direct and significant threat to peace and stability in the Euro-Atlantic area. In the same year, the European Union, in its strategic concept, compass, stated that Russia's aggressive and revisionist actions severely and directly threaten not only the European security order, but the security of European citizens. And in media, we frequently learn about Russia's brutal military attacks, its killings of civilians, and repeated war crimes in Ukraine. You might also think, well, what about China, or Iran, or terrorists? There are other threats to European democracy that might be as severe. But nevertheless, I want to focus on Russia. You can call it geopolitics if you want to, because no matter how hard Europe tries, it can never escape the fact that we neighbor Russia and has to relate to Russia, one way or the other. I am concerned regarding a couple of beliefs that are quite widespread, but do not capture the essence of the Russia challenge correctly. Therefore, if applied, these beliefs will not lead us to the right solutions. They will not bring peace and they will not bring prosperity. On the contrary, they can be devastating for European security. The first is the belief that Russia's war on Ukraine is a local matter, and when solved, things can go back to normal. The second is the belief that inaction and a wait and see how it develops attitude can cause no harm to peace and prosperity. I will start by addressing these beliefs and their fallacies, and I will offer alternative pathways of thinking and propose some recommendations for how Europe should deal with Russia. So my first concern is the rather widespread belief that Russia's war in Ukraine is a local problem that, once settled in truce or through a peace settlement, will make it possible for Europe to go back to how things were, more or less, in the period after the fall of the Berlin Wall. However, this will not be possible because Russia is not a local problem. Rather, Russia is nowadays a threat to the international system, what we international relations scholars call a systemic threat. Here, I build on work by political scientist Dan Reiter, who distinguished between direct threat, a military threat to a country, and systemic threats. A systemic threat is a state that poses a general threat to others and has the potential to shift and affect the international system as such. As a systemic threat, Russia has broad ambitions for political power and territory. Such a threat concerns all states in Europe, even if they have no dispute with Russia, and even if they are part of an alliance or not, because they all risk being drawn into a future system-wide war. Already in 2014, with the illegal annexation of Crimea and war in Donbass, I argue that the West got Russia wrong. The US had already pivoted to Asia, And President Obama mistakenly called Russia a regional power, marked by weakness. He was more concerned, he said, about the prospect of nuclear weapon going off in Manhattan than he was of Russia. And he let the regional European actors, France and Germany, take the lead on solving the conflict through the Normandy format, while continuing to decrease American defense spending. 8 years later, Russia escalated its aggression with a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So what evidence do I have to claim that Russia is a systemic threat and not merely a direct military threat to Ukraine? Well, here we can look at three aspects: Russia's intentions, its capabilities, and its behavior. With regard to intentions, Russia's preference of a multipolar international system has been clearly expressed by Putin since his speech at the Munich Security Conference in 2007, with Russia constituting one such pole in the system. A pole is a great power with aggregated military and economic resources to achieve its end on the global arena. However, since Russia's economic power does not suffice for a position as a pole, Russia's GDP is less than that of Italy or Canada. Instead, Russia uses its military power and the modernization and build-up of military capabilities, combined with massive hybrid warfare and nuclear rattling, to compensate for its economic weakness. Russia also aligns with China to strengthen its position in the system. Russia's ambitions are illustrated not only by its war on Georgia in 2008, or its use of military aggression on Ukraine since 2014, or its repeated threats of using nuclear weapons. Just the other week, Russia announced a shift and a revision of its doctrine on the use of nuclear weapons. Russia also continues to wage a hybrid war against Europe, escalating daily through sabotage, instrumentalization of migration, disinformation campaigns, cyber attacks, attacks on critical infrastructure, and economic coercion. The impact of this warfare is increasingly evident, and I will come back to that. However, Russia's aggressive behavior reaches far beyond Europe. Once again, the US has revealed a Russian campaign interfere in the upcoming American elections, as it did in 2018. The dossier shows also how Moscow targeted German, French, Italian, and British actors in media, politics, and business. Another example is Russia's actions in Mali in 2022, where through the Wagner Group, Russia effectively replaced the French security operations and seized control of valuable resources like gold mines. The strategy is about weakening the European Union, especially France, of course, its hold and stance in Africa, and expand Russia's geopolitical footprint. Or the Middle East, where Russia's officers have been deployed to advise the Iran-backed Houthi forces in Yemen on targeting commercial vessels in the Red Sea and possibly supplying them with advanced anti-ship missiles. This is part of a broader effort to challenge the US and allied interests in the region. North Korea has become a key player in Russia's war strategy. The recent Mutual Defense Pact between Moscow and Pyongyang has seen over 11,000 containers of munitions shipped from North Korea to Russia since September 2023, bolstering its war efforts in Ukraine. And moreover, Russia's relationship with China is growing stronger as both nations seek to reshape the international order to their advantage. NATO has recently called China a decisive enabler of Russia's war in Ukraine, with China providing critical technology and components to bolster Russia's defense capabilities. The Russia-China cooperation extends to military operations. We just witnessed the recent first joint strategic patrol in international airspace off Alaska. So watch the Arctic as we move ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, these are just a few examples showing Russia's systemic ambitions and outreach. Russia does not compare itself with regional actors such as France or Germany. but with the United States and China, the other potential poles of an emerging multipolar system. Put differently, even if Russia's war on Ukraine would end, that will not be the end of Russia's ambitions, nor its role as a spoiler to international peace and order, because that is the role Russia must take in order to punch above its economic weight internationally. Therefore, Europe must adapt to Russia as a systemic threat with a long-term strategy beyond the immediate situation. Europe needs to realize that yes, Russia geographically will always be at the border of Europe, but no, it is not inevitably a part of Europe or necessarily included in our security order. Europe should instead balance against Russia. This shift profoundly affects how Europe can build peace and prosperity in the future. We need a new recipe, and I will come back to what concrete steps Europe needs to take. Before that, I want to address my second concern, which is the risk of inaction. This is a belief that a wait-and-see-how-it-goes approach to Russia could be beneficial for a peaceful path ahead. Such a belief builds on considerations such as, is there really any danger to hope for the best? To signal a wish for dialogue and détente regardless of Russia's behavior? Is that not merely responsible leadership? An attempt to avoid escalation or conflict? To open up for communication and mutual understanding and tune down the military aspects? Well, unfortunately not. In fact, inaction and hesitation might accelerate aggressive behavior from Russia. Also in this aspect, the answer to the question lies in the recognition of Russia as a systemic threat. Misperception or misjudgment can have grand effects, as the Munich Agreement in 1938 taught us. Remember, a systemic threat is a great power with broad ambitions for greater political power and territory. As Robert Jervis points out in his groundbreaking work on security regimes, such a power is not interested in self-imposed restraints on its behavior, because it wants to shift the status quo to its favor, and it wants to have room for expansion. Instead, a threatening great power must be balanced by other powers to restore peace and order, and deterrence is key in this regard. Balancing is done externally by states by forging alliances to counter the power projection of the threatening states. Having Sweden and Finland join NATO is a good illustration of external balancing behavior that strengthens the whole of NATO. Balancing is also done by internal actions of a state, such as investing in military capabilities targeted to meet the particular threat. Despite efforts to increase defense spending, where 23 of 32 allies this year have reached 2% of GDP, it is clear that Europe has not yet done enough to counter Russia. Russia is not deterred by Europe. Its decade-long hybrid warfare against us clearly illustrates that. Just this year, high-up politicians like an aide in the Bundestag and a Latvian member of parliament were proven to be Russian agents. German investigators uncovered the widespread use of bots, making hundreds of thousands of posts per day on social media, aiming to manipulate public opinion. French investigations similarly revealed a sprawling network of Russian disinformation sites targeting Germany, Poland, and France. Moreover, cyber attacks linked to Russian hacking groups have struck at the heart of a digital infrastructure, including Microsoft, further demonstrating the scale of the threat we face. When Poland's President Donald Tusk at Easter warned that Europe is in a pre-war era, he was not the first. British Army Chief Sanders did the same in January, and Germany's Defense Minister Pistorius assessed that Russia could start a major war with Europe within 5 to 8 years. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no time to wait and see. So what must Europe do? The answer is clear. Europe needs a new approach, a realistic recipe for deterrence, resilience, and defense. Alongside the often discussed ingredients of sustainability, competitive edge, green initiatives, and the use of new technology, Europe must invest in defense and resilience, solid, long-term investments that match the scale of the challenge before us. Along these lines, let me pose the following recommendations. First, Europe must recognize that peace and prosperity must be built on a solid foundation of defense capability. Put differently, having deterrence, resilience, and defense in place is a prerequisite for future prosperity. It is not an optional path that can be dismissed due to other urgent needs in the state budget. Europe will not be able to maintain prosperity without a strong defense. Europe's first line of defense is presently in Ukraine. Hence, EU member states and NATO allies should commit to spend 0.25% of their GDP annually to support Ukraine militarily. Ukraine is fighting our fight. Such a pledge signals to Russia that we are not giving up on support. Nations like Estonia, Latvia, and Sweden have already set an example, and others should follow suit. Secondly, EU member states and NATO allies must ramp up their defense spending to 3% of GDP by 2030, the latest. Allies have already agreed that 2% is the floor, not the ceiling. But at the next NATO summit in The Hague, there should be a pledge for 3% of GDP. And the EU leaders should in parallel do a similar equivalent pledge of ambition. Thirdly, Europe must step up its contribution to NATO. European and Canadian allies should provide at least 50% of NATO's designated capabilities by 2030. Today, it's around 70% or up to 90% that the US delivers. Such a shift of equality would not only enhance Europe's defensive capabilities, but also shift the leadership dynamic within NATO, signaling Europe's readiness to shoulder its share of the burden, emphasizing its growing role in this new reality. I have talked in length on Russia's hybrid warfare, and it's important that hybrid threats are not seen in isolation from or in opposition to military threats. Hybrid and military threats are means in the same toolbox and can be combined and designed to reinforce each other. Accordingly, we must develop a holistic and comprehensive security approach to counter hybrid warfare successfully. And I do not like the word hybrid activities. It's hybrid warfare that we see very deliberately from other states. This demands a well-coordinated combination of civilian and military planning. NATO took one step at the Washington summit when allies agreed on the need to integrate civilian planning into the defense strategies. That's an important first step. Other areas where we must think much more integrated are on interoperability and mobility, which are crucial for the defense of Europe, but where a lot lies within our normal peacetime civilian societies. The EU can take further steps to become a true deterrent on hybrid warfare. Presently, our response is too weak, it's too fragmented. As a new report from EU ISS points out, there is a rising interplay between disinformation campaigns from Russia, China, and other actors, between their cyber attacks, economic espionage, political subversion, and the misuse of increasingly more sophisticated AI technologies. So what are the patterns of these incidents, their effects, their broader implications? To deter and counter hybrid warfare, we need not only to see how these various societal domains are used and how they are interconnected, we also need to develop tactics to respond across domains. The EU can support this through joint threat assessments, and they can do it in parallel with NATO if they want to. Intelligence sharing, regulatory measures, and policy harmonization, for instance. Increased investment in public awareness and resilience is also crucial. Public exposure of foreign interference incidents raises the cost of interference for the hostile actors. And mainstream media plays an important role here. Support training of investigating journalism, fact-checking methodology are just a few examples. Finally, we must not lose sight of the other regions, including Moldova, Georgia, and Western Balkans, that are highly vulnerable to Russian influence and at critical political junctures. Ladies and gentlemen, as we face a complex threat landscape with Russia's aggressive maneuvers and growing influence, the need for more decisive action and unity across Europe and NATO has never been more critical. We must acknowledge Russia as a systemic threat that demands a robust response and a new recipe for peace and prosperity, where defense is the platform, not an add-on, not a policy option among many policy areas. So let us act with the resolve and unity needed to face these challenges ahead, with a clear-eyed understanding of the stakes and a firm commitment to defend our shared future. Thank you very much.